homespun, homemade, home-baked. Writing on air at Chapel FM Arts Centre.
So welcome to Chapel FM Arts Centre here in Seacroft. We're broadcasting Writing on Air 2024, the 7th or 8th festival. We can't quite remember which one. We're going to do something now that we usually do at the end of a programme, but I'd like to do now because sometimes it's a bit thrown away at the end. We're going to thank the technical crew here because they're fantastic. Joe and Kabir and Elliot, of course. It's been a fantastic day, lots of wind and gale outside. Great that you're here, fantastic that you made the effort. We're going to hear something rather beautiful now, I know. Vickie Orton and Carol are going to be performing Taking the Sun, the Moon and the Stars.
Miriam never really knew her birth parents. They died when she was only a couple of weeks old, both within a few days of each other, taken by the plague that took so many at that time. Miriam was raised by her godmother, who loved Miriam deeply, as though she were her own child. And Miriam had never really known any other mother, and so she called her godmother Mother. The bond between them was deep. Whenever Miriam was a baby, whenever she was little and as upset or anxious, her mother would sing to her a gentle, soothing, mesmerizing song.
Hush now, bonny babe, rest here in my arms, your light burns bright within. Already you own all of my heart. Grow strong now, my gentle child. Walk safe in my ark. Let love guide your growing, and compassion be guide to your heart.
Miriam's mother was kind, but to some she had a formidable air to her. She seemed to know what was going to happen even before it happened. But much more annoying to Miriam was that she seemed to know what had happened even if she wasn't there. For example, if Miriam took an extra biscuit from the biscuit tin, or if she took a shortcut through the expressly forbidden path through the woods. Her mother was a wise woman in every sense of the word. Men and women from miles around would come to seek her counsel. And she taught Miriam to read and write, and even some rudimentary mathematics. Miriam loved being in the study with her mother. Sometimes it looked more like a laboratory than a study. And Miriam was free to read any of the books that she wanted. She could touch the laboratory equipment. She could even handle the little phials with their tantalizing liquids inside. But the one thing that she could not ever touch, let alone open, was the small door beside the chimney breast. Her mother had only ever told her once, but the tone of voice that she had used was one that Miriam had never heard before or since, and that warning lay deeply rooted inside of her. And being a curious child, she never once went near the door. She didn't even look at it. But one day, she was alone in the study, and she became aware of a light coming from round the edges of the door, a flickering light. And then she heard the refrain of her mother's song. She shouldn't. She couldn't know. She knew it was wrong, but her hand hovered over the door handle.
Let love guide your growing compassion, your heart, sweet Miriam, set me free.
There's something in there. There's something trapped. It wants to be set free. She reached out and she only meant to open the door ajar, but whatever was behind it was so strong it pushed the door wide open, knocking Miriam flat on the floor. And what emerged was a shining globe, an orb, gold, red, amber. It bounced around the room. It was hot, hotter than the coals. It scorched whatever it touched. Hurriedly, Miriam opened the window to let it out before it melted the panes of glass. And when it went out, this orb sat in the sky that had been forever just sky grey. Well, now it had a warm light to it, and when she looked, the trees seemed brighter. The little stream seemed to sparkle, and she wasn't sure if it was her imagination, but the birds seemed to sing louder. What have you done? I told you to never ever touch that door, never open that door, and yet you disobeyed me. You have no idea what you have done. That was my life's work. I spent years coaxing those flames. That orb that you have released is the sun. But it wasn't ready to be released. It's not stable. It will never be able to sustain such a bright light. It will never be able to give a constant warmth. The sky will never be the same again. You have let me down, Miriam, and you must pay a price. You must go into the woods and you must gather the warmest red leaves, the brightest yellow, and the most dazzling orange, and you must bring them back here, and you must make sure that you do not mix those colours up. Bringing them into the garden, I want them all. Miriam fled up to the woods. At first she was angry and she started kicking the leaves around until she realised that that was going to make her job even harder. She settled down and started to separate out the leaves. Oh, this is going to take forever. Thank goodness it's only the leaves on the ground, not the leaves on the trees as well. At that point, it was as though the trees were listening. Because one tree, the tree right in front of her, suddenly released handfuls of leaves. Don't you dare, don't you even think about it, cried Miriam. My job is hard enough without you adding to it. And then 2 arms appeared, each holding a fistful of leaves, and the arms were followed by an upside-down face. What Don't even think about it. No. And then the arms and the face resolved themselves the right way up, and a lad jumped out of the tree. "What you doing?" "None of your business," said Miriam. "Who are you anyway?" "I'm Theo," said the boy, bowing deeply. "At your service." "Well, if you must know, not that it's any of your business, I'm gathering leaves." "Why?" "What's it to you?" "Well, if I'm going to help you, I need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it." "Have you noticed the sky?" "Yes." "Have you noticed that it looks a bit different?" "Well, it's hard to miss it." "Well, that thing in the sky, it's called the sun. And it's all my doing." "Well, actually, no, it's not all my doing. It's nearly all my mother's doing. Not my doing at all. But anyway, I've got to gather the leaves up." That thing in the sky, you did that." My mother, really." "Well, are you a witch?" "No," said Miriam, "I am not a witch. I am a wise woman." Okay, said Theo. And the two of them worked together, gathering the leaves, sorting the colours, bringing them down into the garden. When Miriam's mother took them in an order only known to herself, and she started to burn them, sprinkling little bits of this, little bits of that into the flames. And every time the fire sparkled and spat and glowed, the sun in the sky seemed to get firmer, brighter. Theo disappeared in a haze of smoke. Miriam's mother was right. The sky was never the same again. And at the end of the day, the sun seemed to fall to earth as though exhausted, spilling its colours across the sky. Then night, nothingness, sheer darkness. It took a while for Miriam's mother to trust her again, but eventually they got back on an even footing, and Miriam continued her lessons, learning more and more about herb lore. And everything was back to normal until a few years later. And Miriam was in the study by herself again, and she started to feel cold, really shivery, despite the watery warmth coming in through the window. And then a light coming through the cracks in the forbidden door. Not like last time. This was a cold light, an icy blue, silvery light, almost fluid. And then she heard the refrain from her mother's song. No, she knew better. She shouldn't, but, well, there was something there, and she couldn't help herself. Her hand hovered over the door handle.
Your light burns bright, sweet Miriam, compassion and love your guides. Help me to find my peace now, please offer me sweet release.
It's trapped. It's asking me to set it free. She couldn't ignore the pleading, the plaintive singing, and so, closing her eyes, she pulled the door open, not knowing what to expect, and indeed what burst forth from the door was was not at all what she expected. It was a fluid shape. It waxed and it waned as though it was breathing. And bearing in mind what happened last time, she opened the window straight away and she ushered this shapeshifter out. It flew up into the sky, but much to Miriam's relief, there was no difference, not like last time, until night. Suddenly, the night was no longer nothingness. The night was lit brightly. No, Miriam. No, not again. I thought you'd learnt. I thought you would remember. You've no idea what you have done. What you have done cannot be undone. That thing that you've released, I've been working on it. It wasn't ready to go. It was nothing but a child. But it sang to me, Mother. Well, of course it sang to you. It's a child. It was soothing itself in the same way that I sang to you. I sang to that being the moon. But it wasn't ready. It wasn't ready to go. It was supposed to be full and bright. It was to turn the tides. It was to drive fish to hungry fishermen. It was to regulate women's flow. It was to light the way for the weary nighttime traveller. You have let me down. You've let me down so badly. I don't know if it can be mended. You must go out now, this instant, and you must bring back 1,000 crystals. Stunned, Miriam fled back up to the woods. Where am I going to find crystals? 1,000 crystals. But the moon seemed to be her friend, for she shone a soft light on the forest floor. And sure enough, it was carpeted with crystals as the hoar frost glistened. Miriam started to gather the leaves, gently trying not to disturb those crystals, when she heard footsteps and a snap of the twigs. She hadn't realised she'd been crying, and she wiped her nose against her sleeve. Ugh, that's disgusting. Don't you know, you should never wipe your nose against your sleeve. Haven't you got a hanky? What kind of girl are you? And she looked up, and there was Theo. What you doing? Are you gathering leaves again? Is it the same old story? Not quite. Have you noticed the sky? Yeah, I've noticed the sky. Yeah, it's not like it used to be. Did you do that? No, well, a little bit maybe, but it was my mother, really. It wasn't me. And no, I am not a witch. I am a wise woman. And if you haven't got anything constructive to say, I suggest you go. Oh, all right, hold on. I was just going to come and give you a hand. Crystals, you say? Well, there's plenty on your cheeks. Embarrassed to be caught crying, Miriam started to brush her tears away. Oh, hang on, did you say 1,000 crystals? If you said 1,000 crystals, you can't afford to be wiping away those few hundred that are on your face. And so the two of them started to gather the leaves, sparkling like diamonds. And then suddenly crystals started falling from the sky. Tiny crystals, each joining another, creating even more crystals, greater patterns. And then the ground was covered in a cobweb of white. And still these crystals fell until Theo and Miriam were covered head to toe in snow. And they couldn't stop laughing, and they tipped their heads back and stuck their tongues out, collecting all of the crystals on them. Well, said Theo, I reckon if you include the number of crystals we've eaten, there's got to be 1,000 here. And so they took the leaves back down into the garden, the moon lighting the way for them. Wordlessly, Miriam's mother took the leaves and she started to burn them in an order known only to herself. And as the crystals melted in the fire, she chucked on some herbs and she muttered incantations to herself. And as she did, the moon seemed to grow more solid, less fluid, firmer in place. Theo disappeared into the smoke. It took a long time for things to get back to normal. But they did, and Miriam continued her lessons, and she became so competent that her mother at times would leave her alone to deal with the visitors with the more simple requests. And life was good, and many years went by until Miriam became a young woman. And it was when she was alone with one of the visitors that she heard a scratching coming from behind the door. She tried to ignore it, but the scratching became louder, more insistent, and indeed the visitor turned to look at the door and started to look very uncomfortable. And still the scratching came, and then she heard the refrain from her mother's song. She knows she should ignore it, but the visitor looked so uncomfortable that in the end, the visitor made her excuses to leave, and Miriam showed the visitor out. She hung about downstairs trying to ignore the humming, but it filled her head, and as though pulled by an invisible thread, she found herself back in the study, her hand hovering over the handle.
Be strong now, gentle child, follow your loving heart. Free us, for we are many, we're shrouded by this place.
Such a plaintive cry, such a plaintive song. And although she knew she shouldn't, she just couldn't help herself. She couldn't resist it. And she opened the door, and out came tiny little crystals, so many. They kept coming, they kept coming. The room was filled, and she opened the window, and still the crystals came. How could one small space hold so much? And eventually they were all gone, vanished up into the sky. And all seemed as before until night. At night, the moon was no longer alone. Every single one of those tiny sparkling crystals shone down and twinkled upon the earth. Miriam, I can't believe you've done it again. You've broken my heart. These were my children. Every time I look at them, I see what they could have been. I see what they should have been. Once I could forgive you were a small child, possibly the second time, but not now. Not now. You've learnt so much. I thought you would know better. I can't have you in the house anymore. But I give you a choice. You can be ugly forever, Or you can be beautiful, but lose the power of speech. Now, Miriam was at that tender age when we're full of insecurities, and she didn't realize that actually she was beautiful. And that's what she chose, to be beautiful and lose the power of speech. But who's to say what's beautiful? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and, well, if you have nowhere to call home, if you have nowhere when you can wash, where you can wash your clothes, where you can eat good food, in all honesty, it doesn't matter what you look like. And Miriam sat begging. No way to explain what had happened. When people walked by, they just saw grunts and thought she was a mad woman. And when she tried writing in the dirt, they hurried away or spat, or worse, thinking they were witch marks that she was leaving on the ground. Until one day, a man came along, and he bent down, and gently he lifted Miriam's head, and he looked into her eyes. Miriam? She nodded. It is you, Miriam. What's happened? Is it your mother? She nodded. If you agree, I'll take you back to my house. I can give you something to eat. You can wash. And so she went back with Theo to his house. And she washed, and the maids brought her clothes that they no longer had need for. And after time, they fell in love and got married. And before long, Miriam was pregnant. They were both so pleased. Miriam gave birth to a healthy child. And just as she was holding the newborn in her arms, she heard her mother's refrain.
Hush now, bonny babe, rest here in my arms. Your light burns bright within. Already you own all of my heart. Walk safe within my arms.
A mother appeared in the room. The babe looked towards her mother, and if such a thing was possible, it appeared that the newborn was smiling. Her mother took Miriam's child. She wiped her hands in the blood-soaked sheets, and she smeared the blood across Miriam's face, around her lips. And then she disappeared with the child. Miriam wailed and howled, pulling at her hair, tugging at her nightdress. Theo came in, and she couldn't explain. How do you sign? How do you put pen to paper to explain what just happened? But eventually she managed to convey to him what had happened, and reluctantly he believed her. Miriam became pregnant again, and there was great joy. She gave birth to another healthy babe. As she held the child in her arms, she heard her mother's song.
Hush now, bonny babe, rest here in my arms. Your light burns bright within. Already you own all of my heart. Walk safe within my ark.
The midwife stood as though mesmerized, unmoving, but the babe looked towards Miriam's mother, drawn by its singing. Miriam's mother reached down and took the child. Rubbing her hands in the birthing sheet, she smeared Miriam's face once more with blood. And she took the child away. Miriam was distraught, beside herself, and Theo walked in, and what he saw was his wife with blood smeared round her face and on her hands, and no child. Miriam looked at him, pleading, "Your mother? Again?" And Miriam was so distraught that he felt that, however unlikely it was, he had to believe her. And so he did. It was a couple of years later when Miriam fell pregnant again, and this time she was so anxious. She couldn't risk it. She didn't want this to happen again, and neither did Theo. And so he was determined. He set a guard around the house, he set a guard outside the birthing chamber, and he even managed to convince the midwife to let a guard stay in the room. Miriam gave birth to a healthy baby. But once more she heard her mother's song.
Hush now, bonny babe, rest here in my arms. Your light burns bright within. Already you own all of my heart. Walk safe within my ark.
The babe looked up at Miriam's mother. Miriam cowered, clutching the child close to her chest. But her mother reached and took the babe from her, the babe willingly going to Miriam's mother. Miriam started to struggle, but her mother reached into the sheets. She smeared Miriam's face with blood. She smeared her hands, she smeared her nightdress, and then she disappeared. Miriam just froze. Theo walked in, surprised at the quietness, and it was at that point that the guards and the midwife suddenly came round, and he looked at Miriam and he saw the state that she was in. No. Not again. I could believe you the first time, maybe the second time, but 3 times? No. He turned to the midwives and the guards, what happened here? And they had no memory, but they didn't remember seeing anybody. No, that wasn't possible. They were securing the place. And with a heavy heart, he looked briefly at Miriam and said, "You are a witch. Take her away." And those guards who less than an hour before had been there to ensure her safety, her security, dragged her rudely from her own home. They tied her to a stake, the branches drawing blood from her bare feet. And that was before the pyre had even been lit. As Miriam stood there, she thought she heard the stars whispering. She thought she heard her mother's voice. The guards stopped, motionless, as though in a dream, lit torches held in their hands. And Theo looked around him and realised that he had done Miriam a great injustice. Miriam's mother came over the hill with her children, Miriam's children, the oldest now walking, the middle one a toddler, and the babe swaddled and held tight to her mother's chest. As she rounded the hill, the sun reached its zenith, brighter even more, round and full, and the moon rose high into the night sky, supported by her stars. Theo made his way down to the hill as her children ran towards her and Miriam embraced them. She looked up at her mother. "I'm sorry, Miriam. I'm sorry. I wanted you to feel the pain and the hurt that I felt. I didn't mean it to go this far. Please, please, can you ever forgive me?" And as Theo looked on, something seemed to pass between the two women, something that he couldn't put his finger on. But a great sense of calm and peace enveloped the earth.
Oh, sing now, sweet Miriam, my love for you remains. My strong, gentle child, what lessons we've learned, your children are now returned. Now the sun, it shines bright by day, the moon is at peace by night. Supported by stars bright in the dark sky, all held close by the circle of life.
And here endeth the story.
Thank you.